Most of us are pretty good at reading the subtleties of human body language, and a lot of us are even good at figuring out what a dog is up to based on their body language. But what if your snake is doing something weird? How do you even go about figuring out what it is? Welcome to the Green Room. I'm Bob Bledsoe. I think one of the most fascinating things about keeping snakes is trying to figure out what they're communicating to us based on how they're acting in their body language. Now, a snake is never generally trying to communicate anything to us, but we can figure out what's going on with them based on body language. Hey, what am I saying with my body language? My brother Kent, everyone. Kent, that's not very... Look at my hand. I see your hand, Kent. You're communicating that you'd like to hold snakes and clean cages today. No, that's not even close to what that means. I'm going to use a few of my snakes and some of their strange behaviors as examples today, like Stella here, who's crawling all over me, which means that she loves me. I'm kidding, obviously, but we are going to talk about confirmation bias today. This video is not on basic body language. It's not like your snake looks like this if it's going to strike, or it might act like this if it's not comfortable. If you want to see a video like that, let me know and I'll put one together. But this is more of what I'm going to call improvisational body language interpretation. That's a fancy way of saying stuff that your snake is doing that you can't just look up on the internet. I think it's important to remember that anytime we're interpreting body language of any animal, we're taking an educated guess, which means that we could always be wrong. And keeping that in mind, I think, is going to be helpful to you and your snake. I was going to start off this video with Echo, but she didn't want to come out of her hide, so Stella was already out, so I grabbed her. But now Echo does want to come out of her hide, and I'm about to tell a story about her, so we're going to try to do this with two very exploratory superdwarfs, and we'll see how it goes. So I'm going to give you a few examples of things that my snakes have done that take a little bit of extra figuring. And the first one is Echo. Now, Echo has a standard behavior that she does where if she sees me in the room, she usually will come to the front of the glass. Sometimes she'll do a little bit of pushing even, wanting to come out. And I'll open the door and either take her out or let her come out on her own. And that's kind of the standard thing. She always just wants to be out somewhere. Now, we can actually talk about confirmation bias here. Confirmation bias is where we believe something to be true, and we only see or acknowledge the things that sort of prove what we already think is true, and we ignore other things. So, for example, what I could do is see Echo doing that behavior and go, oh, she's lonely. She wants to come hang out with me. And so I open the door, and I go to bring her out, but then she wraps her tail around her perch as I'm bringing her out. So then I undo her tail, and as I'm undoing her tail, she wraps her body around her water bowl, and so I gotta unwrap her body, and then as I'm trying to pull her out, she kind of grabs the sides of the enclosure with her body, and eventually I get her out, and I'm all sort of out of breath and sweaty, and I'm like, see? She did want to hang out with me. That's confirmation bias. That obviously is a snake that did not want to come out of her enclosure, right? So that's not exactly what happened here, but what started to happen a couple weeks ago is I would open Echo's cage, and then I would try to bring her out. She'd wrap her tail. So I'd go, okay, just come out on your own. And what she would do is just sit there with her nose right out of the door, just sitting there. And she did that for a couple hours. And then I sort of helped her back in to the enclosure and closed the door and locked it since she didn't want to come out. And she started doing exactly the behavior again, pushing, wanting that door open. So I opened the door, and she goes back to sitting right there for another couple hours. Tried to put her back again. This happened all day. I tried to put her back a couple times. Every time I closed the door, she would push on the door. So a person might think, oh, it's probably too warm in there. That's the first thing that you might think, especially for a reticulated python. I keep Echo's temps cooler than I think most. She's usually around 85 or 86. I might bump it up a degree or two if she's digesting, but she likes it cooler. So I confirmed that her temps were all set. They were about 85, so it's not that. Someone might also guess, oh, maybe she made a big mess in there and she needs fresh air. You know, like maybe it's just horrible in there. And usually when a snake makes a big mess, they just go to the other side of their enclosure and it's not that big of a deal. But, you know, I check that and make sure that her cage is clean. So that's all good. So clearly during this day, Echo did not want to be out of her cage, but she did want the door open. So if I didn't check my confirmation bias, I would just think, oh, she wants to be out of her cage. Let me just help her out. Right? But she clearly didn't want to be out of the cage, and also she wanted that door open. So you try to figure out why she might want that door open. Now, Echo does a few behaviors when she's out and about. She either is always moving and kind of all over the place, and then she will eventually find a place to curl up and take a nap. She also does hunting behavior, and her hunting behavior usually is that she'll go up somewhere high and sort of hang off of it with her head down a little bit, and she'll be there for 10 minutes, totally still. And then she'll go somewhere else and be there for 10 minutes, totally still. And so there's some behaviors that I know she does, and she wasn't really doing any of those. But she was awake the whole day. Or, I mean, basically, as far as I could tell, if I walked by, she would react to me. She would follow me with her head. She would, hi, babes. She would, tongue flick if there was any movement. So she was at least alert the entire day. And, when I think about her hunting behavior, that's kind of how she is, but just usually in a different position. And if I also think about the history of where Echo usually eats, it's right there. I mean, I usually target her somewhere, but oftentimes I feed her right outside that door, and she ends up wrapped up in a prey item, either right outside or right inside her enclosure, right there. So that tells me that this behavior might be a new ambush spot for her. She likes to set up her ambush usually sitting up high, but this is where she normally eats. So it makes sense that would be her ambush spot. And I can test that by just putting my arm up to her. Now, she might strike at my arm, but she also there are some body language behaviors that are more basic stuff where I can tell that she thinks that I might be food, and she's getting excited about it right away. So that means that she is sitting in an ambush position. Now, I don't mind. There's no reason for her to be out of food mode. I'm not trying to work with her necessarily. I just want her to be comfortable for the day. And reticulated pythons will sit in ambush position for days, looking for food. So I don't mind her doing that. That's a normal activity for her. She can spend the day looking for food. Doesn't mean that she necessarily needs to eat food, because she had eaten probably 5 days before that, and she eats every 10 days to 2 weeks. So she wasn't ready for food yet. But that was the activity that she chose to do. So that's just a new behavior for her. She's now done it since a few different times, and I know what's going on. I'm about to discuss my favorite ball python that gives me weird behaviors. But before we do that, I'm going to put the superdwarfs on the ladder while you're watching Kent's Corner.
Hi, welcome to Kent's Corner, the only show that's always voted the best. Today, I'm going to tell you all you need to know about snake behavior. Snakes don't talk, as far as we know, and they don't have arms and legs. So it's pretty hard to tell what their behavior means. Snakes can either be straight, or they can be bunched up. If a snake is straight, that means that it's really mad at you and about to strike. But if it's bunched up, that means that it's really mad at you and about to strike, but with the added bonus of being able to spring off the ground and launch an aerial attack. Keep your eyes peeled. I hope I've saved some lives today.
Thanks, Kent. We'll try to keep an eye out for snakes with superpowers. Folks, these are the Horde of Keepers. This is the secret society of people over on Patreon who are just a wonderful community of snake keepers. All they did was go to patreon.com/greenroompythons, and they signed up on whatever tier they wanted to sign up on, and with those tiers they get extra perks. They get extra videos, extra live streams, just content in general. Some of them get sticker packs and t-shirts, and sometimes just random extra things that I throw in those packages. Because like the handwritten chalkboard that makes up the names of these folks, I do all that myself. I pack the packages myself, everything. You would think that I wouldn't be able to pack a package, but I can. So here's our channel sponsor. Thanks to all of them, Black Box Cages, and all those people for supporting the channel. Here's why you can never see the super dwarves once I put them on the tree, is unfortunately they go all the way up to the top near the ceiling. We got Stella curled up on the cliff there, and then Echo on this. This is kind of her standard spot. The next snake we're going to talk about here is the Inspector. And if you are on my Instagram or my TikTok or just watch my YouTube videos, you'll know that the Inspector acts very differently during breeding season, and I like to document it because it's pretty interesting. This is a snake that normally acts kind of the way he's acting today, because he's kind of different each day. But, you know, normal snake, he would prefer not to be handled, but he doesn't usually protest. However, during the few months of breeding season, I'm usually dealing with a very different snake. I'm dealing with a snake that's combative. If I'm messing around in his enclosure and he's in his hide, he'll come out of his enclosure to confront me. He's just a completely different snake. He's never tried to bite me, though. He's never struck, never looked like he was going to bite me. Well, that's not true. He'll S up, but he's not doing any bluff strikes or anything like that. I think that's a very important key to figuring out what might be going on with him. Is he afraid of me? Like, does he think that I'm going to hurt him? A snake that's fearing for their life will usually defend themselves by striking. And he's never done that before. He acts aggressive with me, but not striking. Maybe he's in shed. Maybe he's just cranky because he's in shed. Well, not for months. And I can tell when he's in shed, and I just leave him alone during that time. So it's not that he's in shed. Maybe he's just not tame. Well, I know this snake very well, and I know that he is a tame snake. In other words, he usually tolerates being handled just fine. Kind of like he is today. He's being very good today. So one good thing to ask yourself when you're trying to figure out behavior is, have I ever witnessed the snake do this before? And what were the circumstances surrounding that? And when I ask myself this, I can say yes. I can think back to last season, and I can also look at my notes because I take very detailed notes of my snakes, not only anything that's medically significant, but also interesting behaviors I'll usually note. And I can see that he acted like this exactly the same time last breeding season. So I can determine that this is probably male breeding behavior. It's rare for ball pythons. I can look at another snake that's actively breeding, that's Ron, and Ron's personality doesn't change one bit from week to week, whether he's in breeding season or not in breeding season. So, somebody might look at that and go, well, that's not, ball pythons don't do male combat behavior with humans. Well, this one does, or seems to, So I think it's important to remember that snakes are different. And even though within a species you can say, well, they tend to act like this, that doesn't mean that every snake will act like that, and that doesn't mean that certain snakes aren't going to display additional behaviors that's not necessarily common for that snake. Now, I want to do this disclaimer. Every time I talk about the inspector or post something weird that he's doing, people always message me and go, I have a male ball python. Are they going to do that? They're not. I want to be very clear and say it a whole bunch of times. The inspector is a special snake. He is... It's rare for them to do male combative behavior, and the inspector is the only one that I have ever dealt with, or that I know of even, that acts like that during breeding season. I'm sure there are plenty that do, but I just haven't heard of them. You're doing really well. Would you like to be put back? Can I put you back? Oh no! Oh, I got a snake going to the ground. I got superdwarfs becoming problems. Let's put you back where you would prefer to be. Hi, Echo. I see you. Are you looking for your target? I see. Yeah, I'm not feeding. Can you tell that I'm not feeding? Yeah? Okay, so you're just looking for your target. You're trying to get to the ground. The next snake we're going to talk about is an example of how I'm interpreting normal snake behavior, just basic stuff, but I'm dealing with it differently because of circumstances. This snake here is Little B. She is 3, maybe 4-month-old hatchling now. That we'll say 3.5. We're going to say 3.5. And if I'm totally wrong, it'll be on the screen. She was born with a little dent on the side of her head. She's lacking a muscle right on this side of her head, and it gives her a lazy jaw. And she doesn't tongue flick quite as much as the other snakes, but otherwise she acts pretty normally. And she is able to eat food and pass food and everything else. So I think she's going to be okay. But I've had to assist feed her. And she, by the way, the Horde of Keepers over on Patreon named her. Her name was Arthur Dent. But then when we figured out that she was a female, they named her B. Arthur from Golden Girls. And so now she's just B. Arthur Dent. But I just call her B. She's a little B. So I have to assist feed this young lady right now. She's getting better at it. But basically, that's a pretty invasive process, and it's stressful for a snake. I have to pick her up out of her enclosure, kind of restrain her, put the mouse in her mouth, and obviously she doesn't like that. But she's getting better at eating. She can she can definitely eat the mouse. That's not a problem. It's whether she wants to or not. But lately, all I have to do is just put it in there and she'll take care of the rest. She just hasn't figured out how to strike on her own yet. But the point is that that's a really stressful thing for her to have to go through. Now, she is a snake that normally just cowers at everything. If I try to offer her food, whether it's live or frozen thawed, she's balling up. Anytime anything's introduced into her enclosure that's new, she balls up. She's just very scared of everything. And I'm not helping by assist feeding her. You know, I'm keeping her alive by assist feeding her, but that's not helping her fear. So what I've chosen to do, normally with a snake that's fearful like that, I'm not going to handle them really at all. I'm going to let them see me and let them see that I can do things in their enclosure without touching them, without scaring them too much. And eventually they'll get used to me, and then I'll start handling, and it'll be a nice slow process. But because I have to handle her and assist feed her, what I do is I take her out about once or twice a week, and we have a little handling session like this. And as you can see, she's not scared. She's gotten used to this. And she knows that sometimes when she comes out of the enclosure, she can just kind of explore around. And her body language right now is telling me that she's pretty calm. She doesn't tongue flick a lot. She does sometimes, but not a lot. So right now I haven't seen her tongue flick yet, but that's normal for her because it's just part of her thing. So I've chosen to kind of do the opposite of what I normally would do with a snake like this because of the circumstances. The circumstances are that I don't want her thinking that every time I pull her out, I'm shoving food into her mouth, you know. And it seems to be working. Cute little snake. And she lives in a flower pot. I put a little flower pot in her little tub, and she curls up there with some sphagnum moss. She loves it. You live in a little flower pot. Okay, let's wrap this up. So keep in mind that every snake is different, every circumstance is different, and what you suspect is going on with your snake might not be it. There's just be open to so many other possibilities, and considering their history and what season it is or what day of the week it is sometimes is going to make your snake act a little bit differently. Another thing that's really helpful is ask a friend of yours that has more experience with that species than you do. And what that means is when you go to reptile shows, make friends. Do you want to see this little girl when she first hatched along with all her brothers and sisters? It's a pretty cute video if you like baby snakes. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week. Let's show the camera just your wonky jaw. It makes you special. Look at that. Oh my goodness, look how cute you are.